My name is Paul Amos, and I'm the founder of The Redeemed. The Redeemed is a community of men who come together from all aspects of life to share both life's difficulties as well as our triumphs over those difficulties. Today, we have a very special show for you. We have a friend in Gary Miracle who's come on board to talk to us about his adventure through life, how God has brought him to a closer place, and where ultimately he will lead each and every one of us. Gary, we thank you for being on the show, and we thank you for being here with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. This is an honor to be here talking with you and hopefully reaching some people.
Well, Gary, thank you. And let me begin by asking you the same question we ask all of the people who join us on the show. As the Redeemed, what does redemption mean to you?
Oh my goodness, that is such a loaded question. I am having the opportunity right now to speak and talk to some people, and I'm traveling the country right now in hopes to convince every single person that they are holy, righteous, and redeemed, that they have a new name, that they're taken care of, that they're not who they once were, and that's an amazing thing, and that's what being redeemed means to me. That's what redemption looks like, is just pulled out, saved, rescued, and redeemed, to stand strong, stand tall all the time.
Well, that's awesome. And I couldn't agree with you more, that for so many of us, the opportunity to be redeemed is something we never dreamed possible, much less something that God had done for us ahead of all the mistakes and different choices we would make in life. And I know for me personally, what an amazing chance and an opportunity to relive life after making so many of the wrong choices. And it sounds like you have a similar thought process around redemption and what it's meant for you in your life.
Yeah, it's man, if people can wrap their mind around what being redeemed looks like, and they can wrap their mind around how that plays out on a day-to-day basis, I think that we would see a massive change. We just don't believe. We think it's too good to be true, and I think we're too scared to dive in.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your story, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you've come to Christ, and a little bit about, and eventually we want to get into all the things that have brought you kind of through this difficult circumstance and how you've triumphed over it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's all right. Sit back, buckle up. I'm gonna take you back. All right.
All right.
So I moved to Florida. I was born in Michigan, lived there till I was 10, and then moved to Florida. About a year after we got to Florida, my mom was actually at the laundromat one day, and she was invited to church by a lady at the laundromat, and she decided to go. So she drugged me and my sister with her because she didn't want to go by herself. Sunday morning was always a lawn cutting day for Dad. He always hates this part of the story when I just throw him under the bus. But he would never come with us. It was lawn cutting day. So we just started going to church. When I was 11 years old, I remember sitting at church, and I'll never forget it. It was October 6th at 7:30 p.m. I remember it so vividly because we ran home and I was telling my parents about it. We journaled it and everything. But it was right at that time that I asked Jesus to come into my heart. I guess biblically that's called a Christian. So went down that path. But I would say through a series of events my entire life, and this is what a lot of people are able to relate with, is that, yeah, I invited Jesus in my heart when I was 11 years old, but I was probably 35, 36 years old when I became a Christ follower and truly, started to figure out what that looked like and what that meant. So that's a super long story short to lead me up until a couple years ago.
Well, that gap between when we give our life to Jesus and when we become a true Christian is something I know I've experienced tremendously in my life. I was able to give my life at a very young age, and at the same time live only in, kind of being a Christian outwardly, but not necessarily having that sense of faith on an inward level that allowed me to really grow closer to God and to kind of live with Him on a day-to-day basis. And I sense that's what you're saying as well.
Absolutely. Yep. That's really it, is kind of that transition of realizing, there's really nothing that I can do to make Christ love me any more or any less than he does right now. uh, coupled with just the freedom to rest in that, the freedom to rest in that redemption. That it's like, it's such an amazing thing. And I mentioned I was 35, 36. I'm just going to start talking, Paul. Here we go. All right.
Please do. No, this is your stage.
All right, here we go. I would say I'm 40 right now. I just turned 40 this past summer. And I would say it was about 4 or 5 years ago. I was going through what you would call, an identity crisis. I was really wrestling with who I was, as a man, as a husband, as a father, son, brother, a friend, all that kind of stuff. And really trying to figure out, like, okay, who am I? Who the heck is Christ really? And how does he view me? I've spent most of my life trying to figure out, how to impress God, how to put on a show, how to jump through hoops, how to do all these things to try to make Christ approve of me. And it just wasn't worth it. And I just remember 4 or 5 years ago, just throwing in the towel, being like, there's got to be something more than life, than all of this. So I reached out to one of my great friends and mentor, and he and I started walking through a book together. And it was a book by an author named John Lynch, and it's called The Cure. And I was about 35 years old when my really good friend introduced me to this book. And so much so we walked through the book together. He took the time to walk through it with me, and my mind was blown as to what life can actually look like. So then I finally landed, yes, that's the path that I want to go down. That's the identity that I want to have. That's the theology that I am choosing, to believe in and to walk down right now, and really solidified my faith a little bit. But then it was like, well, what the heck now? Okay, this sounds great. Yes, I'm forgiven, and I'm actually free, and I am changed, and I'm different, and I have the full power of Christ inside of me, and all of these things. But it was a process still. That was a great thought, but how the heck does that look? What do I do now with all of this information? And it was a very back and forth, kind of thing, but always coming back to the freedom in my redemption, and really trying to understand what that looked like. So then that leads me up to what happened to me. So I'll just kind of dive into my story a little bit here of the last 2 years of my life. But it was right after Christmas, 2019. So this Christmas here in goodness gracious, 2 weeks, I will be celebrating my 2-year anniversary. But I got sick right after Christmas in 2019. And so much so that through a matter of days in between Christmas and New Year's, I had gone to the emergency room 4 times. Each time I wasn't getting better. So much so that it was 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve, 2019. So literally 1 hour before Happy New Year and the fun celebration to kick off a new year, I started falling into septic shock, started falling into a coma. So much so that the hospital advised all of my family and friends to come in and say goodbye to me. They had given me a 1.7% chance to live. That was tough. I don't know why they couldn't have given me 2% chance to live, at least a little bit, throw me a bone. Where they come up with 1.7 through all of this, it doesn't make sense to me. But man, they gave me that percent chance to live, and everybody was coming to say goodbye to me. Hospital that I was at was kind of at the end of their rope. They didn't know what to do. They told my family that I was minute by minute, and they were just kind of waiting. So they actually initiated a transfer, and I was airlifted from one hospital to a hospital in Orlando, Florida. And I arrived there about 2 or 3 a.m. I think maybe it was 1 or 2 a.m. I don't remember exactly, but I arrived there, and they were in the same boat. We don't know what's wrong. He's falling into septic shock. There's nothing we can do. We're minute by minute. We made a plea. We made a push to be put on something called the ECMO machine. It's a form of life support that people are put on. So we requested that, but we were told I was not a candidate for it. The ECMO life support machine is typically for people who just had a heart or lung transplant, and I didn't, so I wasn't a candidate for it on paper. But we knew that that's a machine that could help. One of my family members was an emergency room doctor, so we really pushed for it. They just kept telling us no. And at 7:14 a.m. on January 1st, 2020, I coded and died. I was laying lifeless on the hospital bed for just over 7.5 minutes, just under 8 minutes that I had coded. They say it was just like out of the movies. My whole body started turning blue. This little 100-pound nurse, soaking wet, just jumps on top of my chest and starts King Konging me and just pounding on my chest to try to bring me back. They escorted my family out of the room at this point. And about 15 minutes later, they came out. My family started screaming that the doctors, not to say it, not to tell them, just assumed that they were going to tell them I was gone. And the doctor leaned down to my family and said, "We found a slight pulse." And then the new cardiac surgeon came walking out and said, "We found a slight pulse. We don't know what to do. We're minute by minute here, but we're going to throw up a Hail Mary and put him on something called the ECMO machine." So we were so stinking excited that, we felt like God was coming through. Now we're here. We're getting put on the life support machine that I wanted to be on, that I needed to be on, and it's all happening now. So they rushed me back into surgery. It's 5 or 6 hour surgery. They put me on this life support machine, and then I ended up being on it for 10 days in a coma. So it wasn't until January 10th when I woke up. And the way that this life support machine works is it takes all of the blood and oxygen and circulation from your extremities to pump everything into your core organs to keep everything pumping and running strong, while your organs kind of kick back in a little bit. Most people who are on that machine are on it for a day or two, and I was on it for 10, which means that for 10 days, my extremities weren't getting any blood, oxygen, or circulation. So I guess long story long at this point I've been talking, but long story long, when I woke up from the coma, I had been on that machine so long that I had learned that because it was so long without my arms and legs receiving any blood, oxygen, or circulation, that they had died and I was going to have all 4 limbs amputated. So I am sitting here right now talking with you, literally half the man I used to be. I don't have any of my limbs, but God saved my life, and that's a pretty good stinging trade-off to me. I still get to be here, be a dad to my kids and my family, and I'm just very thankful. It's been quite a journey. There's 100 other things that I could share right now, but that's what happened to me right there. How you like that?
What a story, Gary. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. But how powerful to see your smile and your excitement about life amid such tragic circumstances. Talk to me about how God has given you that type of spirit, and how can you be such an optimist?
Yeah. So this is literally my most favorite part of this whole story. I just kind of gave you my medical trauma story there, but I've committed to Christ since the day I comprehended what was happening to me, that until I figure out why he allowed this to happen to me, I was just going to say yes and walk through any door that he opened for me. It's just a commitment I made very early on, which even led me to right here, right now, having this conversation with you. But there's a couple things that ran through my head, and then I'm going to flip the script on you and maybe everybody who's listening here. But the very first verse that came to my head, and I promise you guys, I am not in any way, shape, or form some super Christian here. This is straight from the Lord, because I would not have the strength in my own power to have these thoughts. But my very first thought when I learned of my amputations was the verse in the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 21, that says, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away." And I was just reminded so much about how much the Lord has given me my entire life. Anything I wanted or needed, I didn't really need for anything growing up and in my adult life. So he's given me a ton. And, I just needed to wrap my mind around the fact that right now in my life, it's just taking away time. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And right now, he's thinks it's time to take away my hands and my legs. But the good news is the verse doesn't end there. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away, but blessed be the name of the Lord. So whether he's giving or whether he's taking away, man, God's still good and he's still faithful, and blessed be the name of the Lord. So that's the verse that came to my mind, which kind of launched me into the whole frame of mind that even on my very worst day, when I feel like everything is hitting the fan, when I feel like I'm never going to get out of the hospital, or I feel like I'm never going to get out of fill in the blank for what that is for you, or anybody listening. But, having that reminder that even on that very worst day, Christ is still pretty crazy about me, and, he loves me to death. He's madly in love with me no matter what. That I've spent my entire life being a Christian, again, since I was 11 years old, talking to people and telling people that God is good, and trying to live my life like God is good. But then something really bad happens to me like this, and then I live my life like he's not good anymore. And it just wasn't a stance I was willing to take. I want to live my whole life saying that God is good, and then go through something horrible and then actually live like he's actually good. So that's where I'm at right now. And, I tell him all the time, like, if he doesn't have something for me on the other side of this, I'm going to punch him in the face when I get up there or something. I don't know. He's a big God. I think you can take it. But yeah, that's just where I'm coming from. There's another verse in the book of Job, chapter 42, verse 5, that says, my whole life I've heard about you with my ears, but for the first time I've seen you with my eyes. I watched Christ show up to save my life multiple times while I was in the hospital. I watched numbers on monitors change, through the course of saying one prayer about it. And
Wow.
You can only explain that with Christ just showing up and being a part of that. So, it's pretty easy to live for Christ and to fight for him and your relationship with him when you actually saw him show up to save your life. You just have a different perspective on life and bad times and trauma. And that's where I'm at right now.
You say it's easy to have that kind of perspective when you've seen what you've seen, but so many people don't. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that not only is it God doing things for us, but God also surrounds us a lot of cases with community. And a big part of what we're trying to do at the Redeemed is building a community that helps people understand that even through the most difficult of circumstances, that God is alive and present. And I can feel that coming from you today. Can you talk for a minute about the community that God surrounded you with? I know there were some important people in your life that have helped you and gotten you to where you are today. And you could just talk for a moment about who they are and why they were so critical to your recovery.
Yeah. Oh, this is huge. So I'll talk quickly about that. My family and my village of people that have surrounded me, I was in the hospital for 107 days. And literally not for 1 second was I ever left alone. My family and friends had an actual scheduled calendar of who was going to be in the room with me at all times. And they wrote down index cards, scriptures on index card, and just posted them all over my hospital room, and pictures of me and the family posted all over. I always want to call it a hotel room. I was there so long, it kind of felt like an extended stay, but all over my hospital room. And they just flooded the room for me with prayer and just petition on my behalf. And that bled into me coming home from the hospital. I'm rarely left alone, even right now. People are constantly coming in to help me. I wake up every day to a new text message from somebody. Hey, can I bring you lunch today? People are just rallying around me, and it's such an incredible feeling. Now, here's why. This is where I get a little preachy, but this is the part that excites me the most, is that I'm sitting here with no arms and no legs. And I'm going to venture to say that at the end of the day, every single person that's listening to this right now is struggling with something. We all have a struggle in our life. Like every single one of us is struggling with something at any given moment. And if you're not, buckle up. It's coming. But we're all struggling with something. Now, The only difference between me and you right now is that my struggles in life are very visible. You can see my struggles. You can see that I don't have hands or legs. You can see how hard it is for me to eat or to get a drink or, to read a book to my kids and I'm trying to turn the page without fingers. Like, you can see how difficult life is for me. And my biggest thing is I drop things all the time, without having hands to grab onto something. I'm constantly dropping things. And I guarantee you that you, Paul, and anybody here listening, that if you guys were out to eat with me, or if we were somewhere and we were eating and you saw me drop my fork, I guarantee you that every single person would pick it up and hand it back to me. Most of them without even asking if I wanted help or needed help. Most people would just pick up the fork and hand it back to me because they saw my struggle and they just stepped in to help, because they're very visible. Now, this is the part where I try to flip the script on people. Is I try to say, okay, I'm going to be okay. Even though you can see all of my struggles, I'm going to be all right. I'm going to have prosthetic legs. I'm going to have prosthetic arms and hands. And with that being said, sometimes the scariest struggles on this planet are the invisible ones, the ones you can't see. And I don't know who out there right now is listening to this that's struggling with anxiety or depression or your finances. I don't know. Maybe you're in debt up to your ears and you don't know how you're even going to buy lunch today. Maybe it's your marriage or your relationships. I don't know. I don't know what that is. And that's the scariest part, because if I don't know what your struggle is, then I don't know how to pick up your fork and hand it back to you. And that's terrifying to me. I don't think we were meant or wired to do this life alone. It even says in scripture, where two or more are gathered, Christ is faithful to show up. And we have that opportunity, but unfortunately, not a lot of us are brave enough to risk it and put ourselves out there and share with somebody. But I found that as I share my struggles, that I'm loved more, because people feel so good about stepping in to help me. I'm loved more because of my struggles. I'm not judged for them. And I'm learning that with other people. Like, as I'm talking to other people and as I'm convincing people to be brave enough and to risk it and put yourself out there and just share with one person what you're struggling with, I'm seeing chains fall and freedom just bust through in some of these people's lives. That's not my identity. My anxiety does not define me. My depression does not define me. I am holy, righteous, and redeemed, and I struggle with anxiety. That's who I am. I'm not some saved sinner anymore. I'm a saint who's completely changed by Christ, who still sins sometimes. It's a completely different way of looking at it, but so exciting.
Wow, I am truly inspired. And it is amazing to hear you, through your circumstances, say that. On the same time, I can totally appreciate and have lived out the difference between what you described as your outward struggles and my inward struggles. I lived a life for a very long period of time, living two different lives. One that I presented to the entire world as to who I was and what I was doing on the outside, and then having a totally different set of feelings, emotions, issues, problems, and actions on the inside. And, people couldn't necessarily see that. I thought I was a very good actor. Some may say I was, some may say I wasn't. But I was hiding a whole lot of problems that were going on internally. And those struggles have been ones that have been hard for me to overcome, but only through the love of Christ and through the appreciation and community around me and everybody else have I been able to get to a place where I can live both on the outside and the inside the same way.
Yeah.
So I can truly appreciate what you're saying, and I thank you for sharing your outward struggles so openly with each and every one of us.
And I appreciate it, and I beg people to find one person today that you can tell them what you're struggling with. A lot of people are scared to do it. If you're scared to do that, go to GaryMiracle.com and email me. Tell me. I'll respond to you, and we can talk. We're desperate for community, for that village with each other, and changes things for sure.
Well, Gary, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about one of the triumphs that you've had in going out and showing people from a physical perspective your ability to overcome loss of 4 limbs and to actually go run a race. Maybe you could talk for just a minute about, your ability to overcome and triumph and inspire so many people with your actions.
Right on. Yeah. So I made a commitment. I'm a huge prideful guy. I think I there's a lot of things that I want to prove people wrong in, and I have some friends. I mentioned my friend who walked through that book with me 4 or 5 years ago. He's actually the lead singer of a band who wrote a song called "Say I Won't," and it's such a big anthem, to think like, yes, like say I won't do that. Well, I was faced with that opportunity. I was told that I was going to have my prosthetic walking legs, and I was told back in June that they were going to make and provide me with the awesome looking running blades that you see amputees wear. So I was like little Oscar Pistorius, running around out there. But I got those in June, and I found a 2-mile race that I ran. I started and finished a 2-mile race just this past August 15th. So I trained for about 2 months in running this race, and I did it. I finished it. It was not very graceful. It took me 49 minutes to finish 2 miles, but I started and finished. And I no feet, no excuses. That's where I'm at.
Wow. I mean, I know there are people that are probably listening to this show who struggle with 2 miles with 2 arms and 2 legs, and to think that you were able to do that is quite the triumph. From 7.5 minutes of being declared dead to 107 days in the hospital, and now being able to go out and run a 2-mile race. That is quite the ability of overcoming and setting an example that all of us can be inspired by.
Especially when I didn't run the 2-mile race the last 20 years of my life.
Yeah.
I didn't do it when I had hands and feet.
Well, so Gary, 1.7% chance to live, and you have not only survived, but you have made your life into an inspiration for others. Anything else you'd want to share with our audience today about where you are and what God is doing to continue to work in your life?
God's just faithful to show up every time we call on his name. He's got us right where he wants us to be. We're exactly right on time right now. If we wish that things were different, then we wish that God was different. And that means we assume that God's doing a bad job if we wish things were different, as opposed to trusting him and his timing and his path for everything. So, my prayer is that you can just sit back and trust in the grace of Christ and who he is and how he views you as his child. And that he'll talk to one person in your life about you, about your struggles, about whatever it is you got going on. And sin and struggle in our lives find its power when it's hidden. And when we hide it, sin and struggle is just growing in its power in our life. But the second we can share it, even with just one person, it loses that power and the chains fall. So I'm praying that people can find somebody or email me or reach out to you, Paul, and just talk about life and just figure out how we can link arms and do life pretty good together.
Well, Gary, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show today, for sharing your story and being an inspiration to each and every one of us. I certainly believe if you can come away from your circumstances with the kind and loving heart and the openness to Jesus that you have, that any of us can do the same, whether it be an outward struggle or an inward struggle. And so we just truly thank you.
Amen.
To all of our listeners tonight, thank you so much for hearing Gary and his story. You can reach him at GaryMiracle.com. You can reach out to us at theredeem.com. We encourage each and every one of you to follow us on social media. Can you continue to keep up through our newsletter and what we're doing? We'll have another great show for you the next third Thursday of the month. Good luck, Godspeed, and love each and every one of you.